The throne room fell silent the moment my name left the Empress's mouth, and I felt every eye in that golden hall turn toward me like the barrels of 100 weapons. My name is Daniel Foss, and 3 seconds earlier, I had been standing at the very back of the Crystal Court, holding a tray of translated documents, trying very hard not to be noticed. That is the whole job of a human liaison on Velmora Prime. Stand still. Say nothing. Do not embarrass the delegation. I had been doing that job for 2 years without a single mistake, and now the ruler of the largest empire in known space had just said my name out loud in front of 11 noble houses, 3 war admirals, and her own daughter. Daniel Foss, the Empress repeated, and this time her voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. Step forward. I did not move at first. I genuinely believed I had misheard her. Velmoran is a language full of clicks and low tones, and it was entirely possible that some word close to my name had been spoken, and I had simply projected my own anxiety onto it. But then General Kaith, the tallest and coldest of the war admirals, turned his silver eyes on me, and I understood that no, this was really happening. I set the tray down on the nearest table, and I walked forward. The hall of the Crystal Court is built from a stone that glows faintly blue, mined from the core of Velmora's second moon, and every step I took echoed against walls 300 feet high. I passed noble after noble, tall silver-skinned figures wrapped in ceremonial robes, and I felt their stares like heat on the back of my neck. Some of them had ruled provinces larger than entire star systems. I had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in a coastal town that flooded every spring. I reached the base of the throne and knelt, because that is what you do, and I waited for the ground to somehow swallow me whole. It did not. Rise, the Empress said. Her name is Sel Avith Korin, though almost no one is permitted to speak it aloud, and she is, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful beings in this part of the galaxy. Her empire spans 43 worlds. Her word ends wars before they begin, and she was looking down at me with an expression I could not read, somewhere between amusement and something far more serious. Daniel Foss, she said again, loud enough for the entire chamber to hear. I have called this court together to announce the betrothal of my daughter, Elira Korin, heir to the Velmoran throne. A murmur rippled through the hall, quick and hungry. Every noble house in that room had spent the last several months sending gifts, sending sons, sending daughters, all hoping to be chosen. I had watched the parade of suitors from my post at the back of the room, warriors with medals from 3 campaigns, scholars who had memorized the entire Velmoran legal code, a prince from the outer colonies who had arrived with an honor guard of 200 soldiers just to make an entrance. I have made my choice, the Empress continued, and she looked directly at me. It is this human. The silence that followed was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of shock, of insult, of a room full of powerful beings trying to decide whether they had just witnessed history or an accident. I stood there in my plain gray liaison uniform, no medals, no title, no army behind me, and I understood in that moment that my life had just changed forever, and I had absolutely no idea why. Princess Elira sat beside her mother's throne, and when I finally found the courage to look at her, I saw that she was not smiling. Her expression was calm, careful, unreadable, the same expression I remembered from 4 months earlier, on the night I actually met her, though at the time I had no idea who she was. That night I had been walking back from the archive building after a long shift, cutting through the lower gardens because it was faster, when I heard something break near the reflection pool. I found a young Velmoran woman in plain traveling clothes, ankle twisted badly, alone, with no guards, no attendants, nothing. She told me her name was Elira, and that she had slipped away from her tutors to see the gardens at night, without anyone watching her every move. I did not know she was the crown princess. I only knew that someone was hurt and frightened, and trying very hard not to show it. I carried her to the nearest medical station myself, refused the reward the staff offered once they realized who she was, and made her promise to tell no one it was me. Because the last thing a human liaison needs is attention from the palace guard, asking why he was alone with a Velmoran noble after dark. She had looked at me strangely then, the way you look at something you do not understand, and said only one word before I left. Interesting. I had not spoken to her since. I had assumed she forgot about it entirely. Clearly she had not. "This is unacceptable," a voice cut through the silence, sharp and furious. It belonged to Lord Vesserin, head of one of the oldest noble houses on Velmora, whose own son had been paraded through the court just yesterday as the obvious, expected choice. "Empress, forgive my bluntness, but this creature has no lineage, no rank, no military record worth mentioning. He is not even from this galaxy's founding species. To place him beside the crown princess is an insult to every house in this room." "Careful, Lord Vesserin," the Empress said, and though her voice did not rise, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You forget yourself." "I forget nothing," Vesserin snapped, and then, perhaps realizing he had gone too far, he softened his tone only slightly. "I simply ask that the court be shown the reasoning behind such a decision. Surely even the Empress owes us that much." The Empress was quiet for a long moment, and then she rose from her throne, and the entire hall rose with her out of pure instinct. "You wish to know why I have chosen a human," she said, walking slowly down the steps of the dais until she stood beside me. "Let me tell you what I know about this species, that the rest of you refuse to study. Humanity has existed for perhaps 200,000 years. In that time they built nothing that compares to our star drives, our shield technology, our medicine. By every measure this court uses to judge worth, they are children, young, fragile, short-lived, most of them gone before they reach a single century. And yet," she continued, turning slowly to look at the assembled nobles, "in every conflict humanity has faced since arriving in this galaxy, from the border skirmishes with the Threll Combine to the trade disputes with the Ashen Concord, they have never once broken a treaty. Not one. In 400 years of contact, not a single human government has abandoned an ally under pressure, even when abandoning that ally would have been the wiser, safer choice. They call it stubbornness. I call it something else." She stopped in front of me, and I stood very still, unsure whether I was allowed to breathe. "4 months ago," she said, "my daughter slipped away from her guards, as she has done many times before, and injured herself in the lower gardens. She was alone, frightened, and utterly unprotected. A member of the human delegation found her. He did not summon the guards for a reward. He did not attempt to use the moment for political advantage. He carried her to safety, refused every gift offered to him, and swore secrecy so that she would not be punished for her mistake." I felt my face go hot. I had no idea the Empress knew any of this. "I know because my daughter told me herself," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "Not because she was ordered to, because she chose to. She said this human treated her not as a princess to be managed, but as a person to be helped. In 43 worlds and 11 noble houses, gentlemen, how many of you can say the same of your own sons?" No one answered. "I am not choosing this human because he is strong," the Empress said, turning back to face the full court. "I am not choosing him because his house has power, because it has none. I am choosing him because, in a galaxy full of beings who calculate every kindness for its eventual return, humanity still, somehow, has not learned to stop being kind for free. That is not weakness. That is the rarest strength I have ever encountered, and I intend for it to sit beside my throne." The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier, more thoughtful. I could see some of the older nobles exchanging glances, the kind of glances that meant old memories were surfacing. Stories about human colony ships that stayed behind to shield refugee convoys, about human doctors who had once treated an entire Velmoran settlement during a plague outbreak and asked for nothing in return. Lord Vesserin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, not yet. The Empress returned to her throne, and I remained standing at its base, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain the entire court could hear it. "There is, of course," the Empress said, settling back into her seat, "a tradition that must be honored. Any decision of succession may be challenged. Lord Vesserin, I believe your son wishes to speak." A young Velmoran man stepped forward from the crowd. His name, I would later learn, was Bren Vesserin, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been told no. He was tall, clad in ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine, and he looked at me the way you look at an insect, that has wandered somewhere it does not belong. I invoke the right of challenge, he said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. Let the court decide who is truly worthy to stand beside the princess. The Empress inclined her head. The challenge is accepted. Choose the trial, Lord Bren, within the bounds of tradition and honor. No blood is to be spilled in this court. That is my only condition. Bren smiled, slow and confident, and I understood immediately that he had already planned this, that he had walked into this hall today, expecting exactly this outcome, ready to humiliate whichever unworthy suitor the Empress might somehow choose. The trial of the depth, he announced. A test of endurance and will, as is proper for one who wishes to prove himself worthy of the crown. A ripple of recognition moved through the older nobles. I had never heard of it, but judging by the way several of them nodded slowly, it was clearly an old and respected tradition, and clearly not something designed to be easy. The princess finally spoke, her first words since the announcement. Mother, is this necessary? Tradition exists for a reason, daughter, the Empress said gently, though I caught something protective in her tone. Let it run its course. I trust in my choice. I was given no chance to object, and honestly, I am not sure I would have. Whatever fear I felt was strangely quieter than I expected. I thought of the 2 years I had spent trying to be invisible in this palace, trying not to embarrass anyone, trying to prove that humanity belonged here simply by being unremarkable and reliable. Perhaps this was the moment that mattered more. The trial of the depth, I learned within the hour, took place in the sunken chamber beneath the palace, an enormous flooded cavern, lit by veins of glowing mineral along the rock walls. The water was cold enough to steal the breath from your lungs, and the chamber ran deep, deep enough that even Velmorans, who could hold their breath far longer than any human, treated the lowest levels with caution. The rules were explained to me by an old court official, with tired eyes, and a voice that suggested he had explained this same challenge many times before, to many suitors, most of whom had not returned from the deepest level in good condition. 2 contestants would descend together, tethered by a shared rope of woven fiber. At the bottom of the chamber sat a stone bearing the ancient seal of the Koran bloodline. Whoever retrieved the stone and returned to the surface first would win. The challenge was designed to test 2 things at once, physical endurance and character, because the tether meant that if one contestant panicked or was injured, the other could choose to cut the rope and swim free alone, or hold on and risk failing the trial together. I understood immediately what this trial actually measured, and judging by the small, knowing look the Empress gave me from the observation platform above the water, so did she. Bren stripped off his ceremonial armor and stood at the edge of the platform, lean and confident, his silver skin catching the mineral light. I stood beside him in a simple diving suit provided by the palace staff, feeling every bit as out of place as I had in the throne room. You should surrender now, he said quietly, not unkindly, more like genuine advice. Velmorans can hold air twice as long as your kind. You will drown before you reach the bottom. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather try. He looked at me for a long moment, something almost like curiosity crossing his face, and then the horn sounded, and we dove. The cold hit me like a wall the moment I broke the surface, and I understood within seconds that this trial had never been designed with a human body in mind. The pressure built quickly as we descended, my ears aching, my lungs already screaming for air I was rationing as carefully as I could. Bren moved through the water with the easy grace of a creature born to it, pulling ahead of me almost immediately, the rope between us growing taut. I kept swimming. I did not think about winning. I thought about the 200,000 years the Empress had spoken of, about every human who had ever been told they did not belong somewhere and stayed anyway. I thought about a scared young woman, by a reflection pool, who had trusted a stranger not to hurt her. I kept my legs moving even as they began to burn, even as the darkness at the edges of my vision started to press inward. We reached the bottom together, more by the pull of the rope than by my own strength, and there, resting in a bed of pale stone, sat the ancient seal, carved with symbols older than my own civilization. Bren reached it first. His hand closed around it. And then something shifted in the current, a sudden pull of colder water rushing up from some deeper vent in the chamber floor, and Bren's tether, the very rope meant to bind us together, caught on a jagged outcrop of rock. I saw him twist, saw the sudden panic flash across his face as the current dragged him sideways and the rope pulled taut against the stone, pinning him in place. I had a choice in that instant, the same choice the trial had been built to force. My own air was running dangerously low. I could cut my end of the rope, swim free, and let the trial end however it ended. No one would have blamed me. He was my rival, after all, the son of a man who wanted nothing more than to see me fail. I swam toward him instead. My hands were shaking from cold and exhaustion as I worked the rope free from the rock, my vision beginning to blur at the edges, my chest burning with a desperate need for air I did not have. It took 3 attempts, each one costing precious seconds I could not afford, before the tether finally came loose. Bren kicked free, disoriented, the ancient seal still clutched in his hand, and for a moment, I thought I had simply handed him the victory along with his freedom. Instead, as we both began to rise toward the distant surface light, he reached out and pressed the seal into my hands. I did not understand why until much later, floating on the surface, coughing water from my lungs, while palace attendants pulled us both onto the platform. Bren sat beside me, breathing hard, staring at the ceiling of the chamber. "You had the trial won the moment you cut me loose instead of yourself," he said quietly, once he had caught his breath. "That is the actual test. It was never about who reaches the bottom first." Above us, the Empress stood at the railing of the observation platform, and even from that distance I could see she was not surprised at all. The court reconvened within the hour, still damp, still shaking off the cold of the sunken chamber, and this time when I walked down the center aisle of the crystal court, the silence felt different. Not hostile, watching, waiting. "The trial is complete," the old court official announced. "And by the ancient law, the outcome is declared not by whose hand held the seal at the surface, but by the judgment of character displayed within the depths. The court recognizes that Lord Bren Vesserin willingly surrendered the honor of victory." Bren, still wrapped in a dry cloak, stepped forward and inclined his head toward me, an unmistakable gesture of respect among his people. "I concede the challenge," he said, loud enough for the whole chamber to hear. "Not because I could not have won it, because I do not believe I deserve to, standing beside someone who chose another life over his own victory." Lord Vesserin's face went through several colors before settling into something like grim acceptance. He did not speak again. The Empress rose from her throne one final time, and beside her, Princess Alira stood as well, and for the first time since the ceremony began, I saw her smile, small and real and entirely her own. "Let the court witness," the Empress said, "that the betrothal stands. Not because of blood, not because of rank, but because character, once proven, cannot be argued away by tradition or pride. Daniel Foss of Earth will stand beside my daughter, and through him, I hope this court remembers something it has been too proud to learn from a species it once dismissed as children." I do not remember walking up those final steps to stand beside the princess. I remember only her hand finding mine, steady and warm, despite the chill still clinging to my skin, and the quiet words she spoke, meant only for me, though I suspect the Empress heard them anyway. "I told you," Alira said, "that you were interesting." Outside the palace that night, word had already begun to spread across the capital, and by morning it would spread further still, to every noble house, every trade station, every world under Velmoran rule, and eventually, I imagine, all the way back to Earth itself. A story about a species once measured only by its ships and its weapons, now measured, for the first time in this court's long memory, by something far harder to build and far harder to fake. I was not a soldier. I was not a scholar. I was not a prince with an army at his back. I was only a man who had once helped a stranger by a reflection pool, because it was the right thing to do, and asked for nothing in return. It turned out that was enough to silence an entire empire.